Let's whip through some of the other results we've got from tonight, or the other races that we're following very closely. Let's go to Georgia now, where we are still waiting for enough information to project a winner in the race between Democrat Michelle Nunn and the Republican David Perdue. Also watching a very tight race in Virginia tonight between the Democrat incumbent Mark Warner and his Republican opponent Ed Gillespie. A very, very tight race. A lot of people will be watching that very closely. Also in North Carolina, it's Kay Hagan, the Democratic incumbent, running against Tom Tillis, the Republican. ABC News does not have enough information to project a winner, but this is a biggie. And as you've heard us discussing, New Hampshire also has a big race tonight. The incumbent Jeanne Shaheen, the Democrat, up against Scott Brown, formerly a Republican senator from Massachusetts. We do not have enough information to project a winner at this point. At this point, the Republicans have gained 2 seats. They need 6 to take control of the United States Senate. That is the most prominent dynamic of this evening. And in the governor's race, as we've mentioned, there are 36 governorships up for grabs tonight. And one big one is the state of Arkansas, where the polls just closed, and we can project a winner in that one. And it will be Asa Hutchinson, the Republican, who's been running against the Democrat Mike Ross. This is another race where President Clinton, the former president, campaigned repeatedly and strenuously. By the way, Asa Hutchinson was one of the so-called House managers who brought the impeachment charges against President Clinton. So one has to imagine there was a certain amount of personal animus involved in his campaigning here, apparently to no avail. Let's go over to Nate Silver now from 538. Nate, you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
So what's your view on Arkansas and the apparent lack of impact by the former President Bill Clinton, who campaigned there, I believe, upwards of 6 times?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a good state for Republicans in red states so far, and the Democrats' fundamental problem is that a lot of the contests this year are being held in states that vote very Republican for president now. The fact that the race was projected immediately by ABC News probably means Pryor's going to lose by a wide margin. We see McConnell now up by 12 or 13 points in Kentucky, more than polls projected. So far, Democrats were worried before the election maybe polls will be biased against them. So far, we're seeing polls might have been biased toward them. But again, in these very red states, we're less sure what's going to go on in the more purple states like North Carolina and New Hampshire.
Well, actually, we do have a projection in the purple state of New Hampshire. ABC News is projecting that the winner will be Jeanne Shaheen, the Democrat, who's been running against Scott Brown, the Republican. Jeanne Shaheen and Scott Brown running in a very tight, very heated race. This is a bit of good news for the Democrats tonight. Does it surprise you at all, Nate, given the polling leading up to this?
We had Shaheen as about an 80% favorite going in, so this is finally a piece of good news, though. You clinch an 80% state for Democrats. So what we have to find out now is what do more of these purple states look like? Georgia's a state where maybe things so far look up for David Perdue, the Republican. That would be a big call, but this is a little bit of a sigh of relief for Democrats that you did salvage one purple state at least.
Last I heard, you had the odds of 78% that the Republicans will take the Senate. Where does that stand right now?
So since we made just this Shaheen call on air, we're not quite sure. It was going to be 80% with the call against Pryor in Arkansas, so probably somewhere still in the 70-ish, 75%-ish range, I would think, since that was an expected outcome in New Hampshire.
Do you think that we will know who controls the Senate by the end of tonight, or are we going to be in a situation where it may be January before we find out?
It could be January. This is why Georgia is important to watch. One thing that we're watching in Georgia is how much of the vote is the Libertarian candidate getting, and so far it's not very much, only about 1.5 points. If that's the case, if Perdue, or none maybe, but more likely Perdue, wins by a pretty slim margin by 1.5 or 2 points, he could avoid a runoff. So that's, the state I'm probably watching the most right now. We're getting more and more votes in from Georgia is where that race might be headed.
You mentioned the Libertarian candidate. There are Libertarian and other independent or third-party candidates running in lots of hot races across the country. Some of the Libertarians there's a pizza delivery man and another one's a paralegal. How big a potential spoiler role can these third-party and independent candidates play in these races?
I think it depends on the nature of the Libertarian candidate. You have some Libertarians who are more in the kind of Rand Paul school where they're quite conservative on many issues. You have some are more kind of down the middle Gary Johnson Libertarians who might appeal to young Democratic leaning voters as well. The candidate in North Carolina, probably one of them. I think he's probably drawing more or less evenly from both candidates there. But, it is a factor. On the other hand, sometimes what happens, like in Georgia maybe tonight, is that when a race gets close, a voter might go and say, hey, I like the Libertarian Party, I want to make a protest vote. And then they make the least worst decision and say, well, I don't want to waste my vote either when the race is so close, and wind up defaulting to one of the major parties.
And which governor's races are you watching most closely tonight?
I mean, the Wisconsin governor's race is something that Democrats are hoping they can flip. Scott Walker, based on the polls, Walker was a narrow favorite heading in, but that's maybe the most interesting race in the country potentially. Yes,
with major ramifications potentially for 2016. We have a projection we can make now in the New Jersey governor's race. Not one of the most closely watched, but important nonetheless. I believe we have the information coming up. ABC News can project a winner in the New Jersey governor's race. Stand by. There it is. Sorry, New Jersey Senate race. Actually, it is supposed to be the governor's race, but we don't have it on the screen. I apologize for that. Let's get it back to Nate. Nate, you were talking about governor's races. Are there House races as well that you are looking for potential surprises in tonight?
I mean, there are 435 of these things. You'll always have a few surprises. The polling isn't always very reliable in House races. But probably looking toward the overall number, one thing we look at as a sign for the national mood is simply you add up all the votes for all House candidates around the country and which party wins that. In 2010, it was the GOP by about 7 points. In 2012, it was Democrats by a point or so. So looking to that number will be a good sign. We'll learn probably in a couple days, couple weeks, after all these votes are counted, about what the overall political climate was like and how it compared with both 2010 and 2012 as reference points.
So much to watch tonight. I love that there is actually still some legitimate suspense in the air.